If anyone believes that after the High Court of Justice ruling, the dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro and his accomplices have any chance of succeeding in their attempt to impose fraud and stay in power, the news we are going to give you will convince you otherwise. Today we are going to analyze how the growing internal and external pressure is leading to an explosive situation that could change the destiny of the country at any moment. But first, let's establish the context of what is really happening in the bowels of power. Since the last election, the atmosphere in many military garrisons and state entities, such as PDVSA and Corpolec, has been extremely heated. And it is not because of a simple economic crisis, but because of a real witch hunt driven by a paranoid regime that fears losing everything. But how serious is this situation really? We will see below. Within PDVSA, the country's main industry, more than 100 employees have been forced to resign. But why? Simply for expressing political opinions contrary to the regime, not having attended the marches in support of the government, or even more seriously, having shown sympathy for Maria Corina on social media. A simple like or follow on Instagram is already considered a betrayal. PDVSA's top executives have instructed administrative and operational workers to monitor attendance at demonstrations in support of Maduro and have monitored their social media accounts. Employees who have not supported Maduro, did not go to the marches, or have questioned the official results of the vote are being expelled. And these are not conventional dismissals, they are done in an intimidating practice. They are called to the Human Resources Office, presented with a resignation letter and forced to sign under threat. According to unions, more than 130 employees in Caracas and in the Eastern Division of PDVSA have already been expelled. But is this just the beginning? Political reprisals are escalating, and the regime's paranoia is creating an atmosphere of unsustainable tension within the ranks of the state itself. This is a political reprisal against numerous workers who have shown their opposition to Maduro in the most recent electoral process, said oil union leader Jose Bodas in a statement. Meanwhile, the National Union of Press Workers of Venezuela denounced dismissals from the state-owned Venezuelan television, VTV, and National Radio of Venezuela, stating that some 40 workers have been laid off from those media outlets. For journalist Vladimir Villegas, the number of dismissals amounts to 100 workers at VTV because their WhatsApp statuses were reviewed and their content displeased the political commissars. And not only are employees at PDVSA and state-owned companies being persecuted, other sectors such as the Ministry of Petroleum, Corpolec, Customs, refineries, and some private companies that are in the hands of frontmen for the regime have also been hit by this form of dismissal. For workers, this not only means the loss of their jobs, but also the constant fear of being next on the regime's blacklist, which implies the risk of going to prison. Even so, the dismissed workers, their co-workers, and some unions are being encouraged to show their disagreement and put pressure on the regime by publicly denouncing these situations of abuse. This is translating into a real avalanche of employees and officials who are now against Maduro and are also beginning to express it. That is why Maria Corina Machado, always very well informed of the situation, sent a special and direct message to all public employees, giving them peace of mind and hope. But what happens when this internal pressure is combined with an international offensive? What follows could change the game completely. While the regime is reeling internally, the international community began to act. The High Court of Justice, ruling validating institutional fraud, did nothing but generate adverse reactions, condemnatory statements from the majority of the leaders, and accelerate various legal processes that will add strong pressure to the regime. The United States Treasury Department has already presented a list of more than 60 possible sanctioned persons. And who is on this list? From high-ranking military officers and their families to businessmen who have been key players in the regime's corrupt machinery. The list includes high-ranking military officers who participate in the massive repression in Venezuela, as well as organizations such as the DGCIM and the Bolivarian Police, and officials from the CNE and the TSJ, as well as businessmen who act as frontmen for Nicolás Maduro, Celia Flores, and the Rodriguez brothers, among others. According to the Reuters report, the Treasury Department has already submitted the list to the State Department, and all the relatives of these people would also be added to the list in the sanctions. These sanctions are not a minor issue. They include the freezing of funds deposited in any global financial institution that has branches in the United States. In other words, it is not only the entities that are physically in the United States, but any entity in the world that operates in the United States financial system. For those involved, this means losing access to fortunes amassed during decades of corruption. These businessmen, who until now had served as operators, intermediaries, and frontmen for the dictatorship, are also receiving strong pressure from the real owners to hide their fortunes, since they do not belong to them, but to Nicolás Maduro, Celia Flores, the Rodriguez brothers, Tarek William Saab, and even Tarek El Aissami, among other leaders of the regime. Desperation reigns among them because they are at serious risk of losing all the results of their efforts after years of corruption if they continue to support the dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro. To establish the sanctions, the Treasury Department has an investigation team that generally prepares a complete report on each of the people to be sanctioned, which in some cases could also mean the formal initiation of criminal charges in federal courts in the United States for crimes of corruption or violation of human rights. The announcement of the sanctions also initiates investigations by agencies such as Homeland Security, which is the United States Department of National Security, USDHS, which has a department they call kleptocracy, which is responsible for pursuing officials and private businessmen who are involved in illicit or corrupt businesses linked to the regime. At the head of this list is the President of the Venezuelan High Court of Justice, Cariclia Rodriguez, and also generals of the Bolivarian National Guard who participate in the repression, such as the aforementioned General Fonseca Alvarado and several officials of the DGCIM who have been identified as key figures in the regime's repressive offensive. According to Washington, the list is initial and will surely be increased to include private businessmen who serve the interests of the dictatorship. Such would be the case, for example, of businessman Jorge Andrés Jiménez Ochoa, the young president of the Venezuelan Football Federation, who has managed to climb positions in the orbit of business with the regime under the protective wing of Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. His flights in official delegations take him around the world not only to promote La Vinotinto, but for his own benefit through a business structure that corruptly brokers food for CLAP and also oil for PDVSA. In Venezuela, he is known as the Lord of PDVSA, and he became one of the favorite frontmen of Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who controls the sale of crude oil to Chinese companies, violating the restrictions imposed by the United States through firms such as Panglobal Energy SMC Aliti, Kyosan FCCO, and Ripple Oil, among several other identified international companies. Jimenez Ochoa, Delcy's frontman, is the happy owner of 2 properties in Miami located in the Kendall and Brickell areas, which have a combined value of more than $1 million. Another target is businessman Majed Khalil Majzoub, a multi-talented Venezuelan businessman of Lebanese descent who amassed a fortune as a contractor for Chavismo, who, with companies as varied and diverse as Hornos Eléctricos de Venezuela, Grupo Hardwell Technologies, and Consorcio Pacific Rim Energy, also represents the interests of the Rodriguez brothers, Diosdado Cabello, and several high-ranking generals. Treasury Department sleuths are also after cryptocurrency accounts that make transactions to and from Venezuela and that handle millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars in illegally obtained funds. Treasury Department investigators also included companies that are directly linked to figures such as Nicolásito Maduro, Vladimir Padrino, and Diosdado Cabello on the list of possible sanctions. Several of these companies had been exposed in 2 previous reports on this same channel, which are available and are titled Corruption in Venezuela, Maduro, Maradona, and the Theft of 4,000 Million, and where we expose the triangulation in which these firms were used, and another more detailed report in which we denounce the methodology used in We reveal the clandestine route of the emptying of Venezuela, in which we denounce the private planes and the destinations of the stolen gold. Among the companies on the list are firms such as Special Nutrients linked to Vladimir Padrino, Investment Black, and Farfalla Overseas Corp, linked to the son of Nicolás Maduro, nicknamed Nicolásito, Viento Frio, and Global Supplies, controlled by Diosdado through 2 nephews, and even a firm in Guatemala, MKE Manufacturing, which is linked to none other than President Andrés Manuel López Obrador in Mexico, who participated in food export businesses to Venezuela through Corpovex, the Venezuelan Foreign Trade Corporation, according to a document that proves it. Perhaps this explains his lack of commitment to condemning the regime. Also on the list to be included are airlines, including lines such as Venezolana de Aviación and Rutaca Airlines, both controlled by former magistrate Michael Moreno, who was the former president of the Supreme Court of Justice of Venezuela and who last year had a luxurious mansion valued at 6 million euros seized in Italy, located in the Capanori area, province of Lucca, Tuscany region. The Italian Guardia di Finanza, focused on an alleged case of money laundering in the purchase of the villa and the money flows, led investigators to accounts in Switzerland, which were in the name of a Panamanian company belonging to Michael Moreno. Another airline is Avior Airlines, because the operations in Venezuela of this airline are run by the brothers Roberto and Jorge Áñez, who are also linked to an alleged fraud of the so-called Chinese fund. Let us remember, Roberto Áñez, David Brillemburg, and Juan Ramirez, in partnership with the then socialist mayor of the municipality of San Francisco del Zulia, Omar Prieto, who later became governor, established a trust in Bancoex to access resources from the Chinese fund for the construction of a garbage incinerator plant, according to a corruption investigation by the United States Department of State. The trust in Bancoex was called Ciudad de Progreso Alfa Priri, CIUPROCA, and by 2013 the companies controlled by Áñez and Ramirez had more than $400 million of resources from the Chinese fund liquidated. All the resources were diverted to the accounts of Áñez, Ramirez, and Brillemburg, the document reads. But that is not all. The brothers Jorge and Roberto Áñez, owners of Avior Airlines, are also involved in a cryptocurrency scam in association with Joselit Ramirez, former national superintendent of crypto assets of Venezuela and now a prisoner of the regime. And this is just the beginning. A lot of international information is reaching Washington as input from other countries that detected money laundering with Venezuelan origin, so a legal storm is approaching that could change their lives forever. But what is happening within the regime? How are they reacting to this growing pressure? What we will reveal below will surely surprise you. The paranoia within the Maduro regime is reaching critical levels. The internal wear and tear is so great that, to cite an example, the governor of the state of Falcón, Victor Clark, a person linked to Diosdado Cabello, moved from his governor's residence and is now sleeping in a dependency of the José Leonardo Chirino Airport in the city of Coro, protected by dozens of police officers and with a plane ready in a hangar, ready to take off to an unknown destination if an uprising occurs. It is known that Vladimir Padrino does not spend the night in the same places, changes his routines every day, and distrusts his entire security structure. The same is happening with the high command. Everyone on alert and distrusting everyone. But why so much fear? The answer lies in the growing distrust and fear that even those who were once loyal are now looking for a way out. The lack of cohesion and fear of reprisals from the international community are eroding the internal structure of the regime. And if we add to this the resistance within the armed forces, the scenario becomes even more uncertain. And in some garrisons, such as Anzoátegui for example, the commanders have shown their refusal to comply with the general order to repress mass gatherings in the states. Nobody wants to risk having a legal case for repressing the people. The regime is beginning to perceive that it is surrounded in stoppage time, and as we anticipated in the previous report entitled Maduro's Tyranny Cornered, we reveal its two only options. The end is approaching faster every day, and that makes them very nervous. In Sucre, to cite another case, Brigadier General Ciro José Fonseca Alvarado, commander of the Cumaná-based Zone 53 of the National Guard, has expressed concern for the well-being of his family because they no longer trust the stability of the regime. His sister, Nayana Rosalie Fonseca Alvarado, who lives in a $500,000 house in the Kendall area of Miami, could be targeted and lose her fortune if the regime falls. General Fonseca Alvarado, like many generals of the National Guard, has reason to fear. He knows he is involved in drug trafficking investigations, and if the regime ends, they could now go after him and his assets. This internal distrust could be the trigger that precipitates a total collapse. The dictatorship is so concerned about sanctions and other actions by the United States government that 2 weeks ago, it sent none other than former Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza, who was allowed to land in Washington despite also being sanctioned by OFAC. OFAC is the Office of the United States Department of the Treasury that administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions based on U.S. foreign policy. OFAC had already sanctioned Arreaza in 2017 for being part of Maduro's corrupt entourage, but they let him attend Washington because he came as an emissary. What did Arreaza go to Washington to do at this critical time that Venezuela and particularly the dictatorship are going through? According to journalistic sources, Arreaza held at least one secret meeting at the State Department to discuss issues of a possible arrangement. Although no further details were provided, it can be speculated that he would have presented direct proposals from Nicolás Maduro in exchange for obtaining guarantees in case a transition to democracy in Venezuela is inevitable. It is evident that the growing pressures from all sides and that keep Maduro in a state of insomnia and paranoia are giving the signal to many countries that the time has finally come to act more harshly and pressure his departure. The clear statement made by the Uruguayan ambassador to the OAS, which we have also published on our channel, was decisive in getting the rest of the countries to sign the document condemning Maduro's fraud. As Manuel Washington Abdallah said, they will continue to apply as much pressure as necessary until Maduro hands over power. We recommend watching the video of his speech. But what is the role of the international community in this outcome? What options are on the table? Let's see now. International pressure is not limited to economic sanctions. In July 2024, a group of jurists filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court against Nicolás Maduro for crimes against humanity. What does this mean? If the ICC issues an arrest warrant, Maduro could lose the legitimacy of control and governability in the eyes of the world, which would accelerate his downfall. And if diplomatic channels fail, as is happening, there will be no other option than the intervention of force. After the resounding failure of the negotiations led by Lula da Silva, Gustavo Petro, and López Obrador, the alternatives that follow are all coercive. And to put more pressure on the regime, there is already an option proposed by former military man Erik Prince, founder of Blackwater, the most important private army in the world, who proposed on his X account that the United States strongly increase the reward established by its State Department for the capture of Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello, which at this moment is defined between the two at $25 million, and that Prince proposes to be taken to a minimum of $100 million. Even in a statement to Venezuelans from his X account, the mercenary closed with a suggestive message: "We will arrive soon. We will support you until the end." This is not just a theory, it is a reality that is being seriously considered in international circles. One of the hypotheses that circulate is the beginning of actions with what are called extraction raids, which consist of entering Venezuela and removing from the country one or several high command generals who have an arrest warrant and presenting them to the United States justice system. These actions would demoralize the entire command structure of the Bolivarian armed forces and leave room for an uprising in support of the people, further isolating the tyrant. The international situation in which the regime has fallen is so critical that even Maduro's traditional allies, such as Russia and China, are beginning to distance themselves. With their own internal problems, these countries cannot afford a prolonged conflict in Venezuela. This leaves the dictator increasingly isolated and vulnerable. With all these pressures combined, what is the future of Venezuela? Let us venture a reflection on what could come. The situation in Venezuela has already reached a point of no return. With internal and external pressure increasing and distrust eroding the basis of Maduro's power, the future of the regime is increasingly uncertain. But one thing is clear: the end is getting closer every day. The regime will implode from within, a product of its own betrayals and the lack of money to continue supporting it with the bribes that were buying loyalties. The top brass will be the targets of the first international arrests, and there we will be able to timidly glimpse the new military figures that will emerge in the process, those who will take command and immediately subordinate themselves to the elected President Edmundo González Urrutia to begin a transition. Despite the resistance to leave power by the narco-terrorists who took over the Venezuelan state and show no signs of delegating it by good means, we hope that the process is achieved through a great victory of diplomacy over force so that Latin America can recover one more democracy and advance towards a better quality of life for all inhabitants, opening a new stage of hope for all its citizens. In the meantime, we will remain attentive because in the next few days anything could happen. Thank you for joining us in this analysis. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to stay up to date with the latest updates on the situation in Venezuela. Until next time.